On the morning of June 30th, 1908, something exploded in the sky above a remote forest in Siberia. The blast was so powerful that it flattened more than 80 million trees. Windows shattered hundreds of kilometers away. People were knocked off their feet. Some witnesses later said the sky itself seemed to split open with fire. Yet, when scientists eventually reached the site, they discovered something deeply unsettling. There was no crater, no impact site, no meteorite fragments large enough to explain what happened. To this day, more than a century later, the Tunguska explosion remains one of the most mysterious events in the history of our planet. So what actually exploded over Siberia that morning? And could something like it happen again? Before we dive deeper into the mystery, let me ask you something. If an explosion powerful enough to destroy an entire forest happened today, do you think we would know exactly what caused it? Or could something like Tunguska still happen without a clear explanation? Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, to understand how strange this event really was, we need to go back to the beginning. At the start of the 20th century, Siberia was one of the most isolated places on Earth. Vast forests stretched for thousands of kilometers. Small villages were scattered across the wilderness. Communication was limited. Travel was slow. And in 1908, there were no satellites, no aircraft patrols, and no modern monitoring systems watching the skies. So, when the explosion happened, the world did not immediately understand what had occurred. But the people who lived in the region certainly noticed something extraordinary. Several witnesses reported seeing a bright fireball moving across the sky. It appeared larger than the sun. Some described it as a blazing column of light. Others said it looked like a massive object tearing through the atmosphere. Moments later, a powerful shockwave hit the ground. Trees shook violently, windows shattered. And in some villages, people were thrown to the floor by the force of the blast. One witness later described seeing a huge flash of light followed by a wave of heat so intense that he thought his clothes were on fire. Then came the sound. A thunderous explosion echoed across the landscape. Some described it as a series of booming crashes, like artillery fire. Others said it sounded like a massive rock slide or the roar of a giant storm. The shockwave traveled across hundreds of kilometers of wilderness. Seismic stations thousands of kilometers away detected the vibrations. Atmospheric pressure waves circled the globe. Yet despite the scale of the explosion, it would take nearly 2 decades before scientists were able to properly investigate the site. The reason was simple. The Tunguska region was incredibly remote. Reaching the area required long and difficult travel across forests, rivers, and rough terrain. Political turmoil in Russia during the early 20th century also delayed scientific expeditions. It was not until 1927 that a researcher named Leonid Kulik finally led the first major expedition to the blast zone. What he found there was unlike anything he expected. Instead of a crater, Kulik discovered an enormous area of flattened forest. Trees had been knocked down in a radial pattern, as though an immense force had pushed outward from a central point. But strangely, at the center of the blast zone, many trees were still standing. They had been stripped of their branches and bark, but they remained upright. It looked as though a powerful explosion had occurred high in the air above the forest. The pattern suggested that the blast had happened several kilometers above the ground. This phenomenon is known as an airburst. When a large object enters the Earth's atmosphere at extremely high speed, the pressure and heat can cause it to explode before reaching the ground. The resulting shockwave can release enormous energy. In the case of Tunguska, scientists estimate the explosion was equivalent to between 10 and 15 megatons of TNT. That is roughly 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. And yet there was still one major problem. No impact crater, no large fragments. Nothing that clearly identified the object responsible for the explosion. This absence of physical evidence opened the door to decades of speculation. Many scientists believe the most likely explanation is that a small asteroid entered Earth's atmosphere and exploded mid-air. Others argue that the object may have been a comet composed mostly of ice. If a comet exploded in the atmosphere, much of its material could have vaporized completely. But even these explanations leave unanswered questions. If the object was an asteroid, why were so few fragments recovered? If it was a comet, why did the explosion produce such an intense shockwave? Some researchers have proposed more unusual theories. One hypothesis suggested that a pocket of natural gas may have ignited in the atmosphere. Another proposed that a fragment of antimatter collided with Earth, releasing enormous energy upon contact. Some even speculated that a miniature black hole might have passed through the planet. Most of these ideas remain highly controversial and lack solid evidence. But the strange details surrounding Tunguska continue to inspire debate. One of the most fascinating aspects of the event is the strange atmospheric effects reported across Europe in the days following the explosion. For several nights after the blast, the skies over parts of Europe appeared unusually bright. People in London were reportedly able to read newspapers outdoors at midnight due to the glow in the sky. Scientists believe these luminous nights may have been caused by dust particles thrown high into the atmosphere by the explosion. But again, the exact mechanisms remain uncertain. Even modern research has not fully solved the mystery. In recent decades, scientists have used satellite imagery, computer simulations, and advanced geological surveys to study the Tunguska region. Many now believe that a small asteroid approximately 50 to 60 meters in diameter entered the atmosphere at extremely high speed. The immense pressure caused it to explode several kilometers above the forest. This theory explains the airburst pattern and the absence of a crater, but it also raises an unsettling possibility. Events like Tunguska may not be as rare as we once believed. Astronomers now know that Earth is constantly surrounded by thousands of near-Earth objects. Most are small enough to burn up harmlessly in the atmosphere, but occasionally, larger objects enter the Earth's path. In 2013, a smaller but similar event occurred over the Russian city of Chelyabinsk. A meteor exploded high in the atmosphere, producing a shockwave that shattered windows across the city and injured more than 1,000 people. The Chelyabinsk explosion released energy equivalent to roughly 500 kilotons of TNT. That was only a fraction of the power estimated for Tunguska. If an object of Tunguska's size were to explode over a modern city, the consequences could be devastating. Entire neighborhoods could be destroyed. Shockwaves could damage buildings across vast areas, and the explosion might occur with little warning. Today, astronomers around the world are working to detect and track potentially dangerous asteroids. New telescopes scan the skies each night searching for objects that might one day cross Earth's orbit. Early detection could allow scientists to predict impacts decades in advance. But smaller objects like the one believed to have caused Tunguska are far more difficult to detect. Many of them remain invisible until they are already approaching Earth, which brings us back to the central mystery. What exactly exploded over Siberia in 1908? Was it a small asteroid? A comet fragment? Or something we still do not fully understand? More than a century has passed, yet the Tunguska event remains one of the most powerful natural explosions ever recorded in modern history. An entire forest flattened in seconds. A shockwave that circled the planet, and a mystery that scientists are still trying to fully explain. Events like Tunguska remind us that our planet exists within a dynamic and sometimes unpredictable cosmic environment. Space is not empty. It is filled with objects moving at incredible speeds. Most pass harmlessly through the solar system, but occasionally one crosses paths with Earth. When that happens, the results can be catastrophic. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the next object capable of producing a Tunguska-level explosion may already be traveling silently through the darkness, waiting. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps the channel grow and allows us to continue exploring the greatest unsolved mysteries in history. And if you have your own theory about what caused the Tunguska explosion, share it in the comments. because sometimes the most interesting answers come from the questions we're still asking. This is Unsolved Requiem, and the mystery continues.